What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Row YouTube channel. We're back with our top 25 series. We are moving on down or up, depending on how you look at the rankings, but we're going from the bottom to the top. We're out here, the NC State Wolfpack. We're going to be talking about the 2024 preview, going over recruits, their offense, defense, impact players, their schedule breakdown, all of the above, everything you could possibly ask for. We're diving into that. But before we do that, we got to talk about NC State last year. They went 9-4 down the stretch. They finished at 21st in the AP poll. A conference record was 6-2. When you're looking at them overall, they finished pretty well last year. When you think about kind of how they finished the season, even with Brennan Armstrong, their quarterback play not being as strong, MJ Morris was kind of in there as well. They finished down the stretch. They won 5 games in a row. Clemson beat Clemson. That's a big win for this program. Miami, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and then North Carolina. They really 39-20. That was one of those games that Brennan Armstrong probably had his best game of the season. They did lose in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. You got to remember the Pop-Tarts Bowl out there versus Kansas State. But that offense started clicking, right? First-year offensive coordinator. Now they're like, hey, this thing's clicking a little bit. And, you're expecting kind of big things. They did have some guys leave, some notable losses out there. But overall, you have to be pretty excited if you're an NC State fan because of how that offense kind of clicked last year with how they finished. And overall, Dave Doran's got them kind of humming a little bit. It's a lot of fun out there. Robert Anae is that offensive coordinator. Dave Doran's kind of got that going. But like we get into, offense isn't necessarily a question mark. Defense, though, they got some things. They got some turnover that they got to kind of fix in there. But let's go over this offense here and what we're looking at. Last year, too, just from an analytical perspective and just a rank perspective, points per game, they were only at 24.7. Early in the season, though, that's what really trended there. They were ranked 74th. When you're looking at rush play percentage, 48th, rushing yards per game, rush average, they're basically in the middle of the pack, about 50, 55. That's where they average. From a passing perspective, though, they were awful, dread awful. They were not great. Passes per game, they're 86. Yards per pass, 96. So a lot of negative ADOT, small, basically quick screens, those type of things. Completion percentage, 99. Pass play percentage, 86. So, really, what carried them down the stretch was efficiency. They got better, but really that beginning of the year really struggled there. That's where they struggled last season.
Yeah, and quite frankly, they've upgraded significantly from an offensive perspective. Grayson McCall is going to be their new quarterback, very experienced kid from Coastal Carolina. The draft people were talking about 3 years ago, it feels like, but he's coming back for a graduate year here with NC State, and I think that is a massive upgrade. So if nothing else, if everything else stays the same and your quarterback is upgraded so significantly, I think you're in good shape. But they upgraded their wide receiver room as well. Noah Rogers is coming over from Ohio State. Really good player that it's tough to see the field at Ohio State. But I think everyone's excited to see what he can do with some opportunity here. They brought in Dakari Collins as well. But Kevin Concepcion is really the headliner of this group. That kid is an absolute stud. Massive playmaker for them. But then the offensive line, you look at what they're able to do from a consistency standpoint. They lost Dylan McMahon to the NFL draft. Zeke Correll is in now from Notre Dame. He had some really good reps last year for them. So I think you're replacing an NFL guy with another potential NFL guy. This offensive line didn't perform very well last year, but when you have Brennan Armstrong back there holding on to the football, not really knowing what to do, you can kind of understand that. But overall, this offense to me is several steps further advanced than what they were last year.
Oh, yeah. I love what they did on the offensive side, when we get into kind of the transfers and kind of where they went. But, yeah, it is notable. I think that, Grayson McCall is an upgrade, right? When you're thinking of him and being kind of that, I know coming out and just people have talked about, hey, he wasn't the same quarterback that he was at Coastal Carolina. But, hey, now he's in this offense that fits him really well. And these are the best weapons he's ever played with. These weapons are legitimate for Grayson McCall out there. And the running back room, Jordan Waters transfer, Hollywood Smothers, these guys that are in that room. Very, very solid there. As far as losses goes for this offense, not too many big losses here. I didn't even put Brennan Armstrong on the notable losses. So just letting you guys know, I don't think he played that well enough to put him up there. Porter Rooks was out there, when you're talking about kind of going there. He had 166 yards. Michael Allen was someone that I like going in season, but just didn't definitely do anything. 251 yards, a touchdown. Dylan McMahon, center, obviously is probably the big one. MJ Morris, I think, is the interesting one. Going to Maryland, he was supposed to be that next guy up. People felt like Doran really kind of screwed him over But there were some things with him. I think there was some emotional things there. I know they talked about, I know NC State, because I've read all this stuff about something about his family, maybe his dad being one of those dads that's really pushing him for playing time. He kind of saved his, he's a sophomore technically because they didn't want to come after those 4 games. He saved his red shirt. He used it and he's like, oh, I'm coming back. Then he transfers. So MJ Morris to me is a loss because I do think he's talented. I do think he is a very talented quarterback. And as a sophomore, you really could have relied on him moving forward in your program. But they kind of shore that up with Grayson McCall. So it's one of those things where, hey, I get it. You lost him, but at least you addressed that quarterback room.
Yeah, and as we get into the recruits, from everything we understand, CJ Bailey is the future. So they're pretty comfortable with their quarterback room, and I don't necessarily think that I would be with a 3-star kid, I believe, right? Coming in and as a true freshman and learning behind Grace McCall. I think that's a great idea for an incoming freshman, that you can learn behind this super experienced guy. But to me, everything I've heard suggests that is their quarterback room of the future. Bailey is going to take over for McCall next year, and they're really happy with that. MJ Morris, when he was out there, he just didn't play well enough to justify maybe some of those problems. And I think there's certainly potential there, and I think that is a loss, and more of a loss than Brennan Armstrong, even if Armstrong was probably the better quarterback between the two last year. I mean, they benched Brennan to go to MJ and then had to go back to Brennan, which is kind of embarrassing. But it worked out, right? Like we talked about, their late season offense was really good. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but let's talk about Bailey and the other recruits.
Yeah, let's get it. Terrell Anderson is the big one, right? When you're talking about the wide receiver, number 20 wide receiver in the country. When you look at him, like pretty good size frame, 95 rated on 247 Sports. They really talk about him being a natural pass catcher, someone that's really good at high pointing the ball, really fits this offense. Like he's their big guy. They won that recruit over Georgia. Georgia offered him late, and he stuck and stayed with NC State. That was a big win for this coaching staff out there. CJ Bailey, as you mentioned, you talked about him a little bit. 3-star kid, big kid, 6'6", 185. Like he's got that. Gonna have to fill in that frame a little bit. Robbie Martin, Tank Boston, Christian Zachary, kind of going through these guys. The big one, Jonathan Paylor, is another guy that could be that guy. 5'9", 170, 4-star kid. Is an athlete, but it does look like, when you're looking at the stats, you can play on the offensive side of the ball there. He was a big get for them. Tyler West. So definitely went after guys. Isaiah Jones is another one, really shored up that running back room there. But Paylor to me is the X factor of this, and Terrell Anderson.
Yeah, Paylor's 24/7 comp that they threw on him was Jerick McKinnon. And we've seen players with elite speed already. Kevin Concepcion is one of them, where if you have elite speed in this offense, you're probably going to see the field. So I think there's an outside shot that Paylor's on the field as early as this year, given this running back room, a nice little dynamic. But yeah, between Paylor and Bailey and Anderson, I think that this is a good class. I mean, it's obviously filled with guys that could hit potential, but this is a really, really good recruiting class for NC State, in my opinion.
Yeah, number 27 overall. So they did a really good job for an NC State class. That composite rank was 28. Transfer rank, they hit 18. So they really went after transfers, like we're kind of mentioning here. Noah Rogers, Zeke Coral, Wesley Grimes, Hollywood Smothers, Valen Erickson, Jordan Waters, Justin Jolly. Really good players. Jordan Waters was a very good running back from Duke this last year. And really the guy that I love, and you know this, Noah Rogers is my guy this year, is someone who could really pop off. Was at Ohio State. Man, sometimes it doesn't work out. Ohio State's got every wide receiver known to man out there. And I think that, when you're looking at him, he was a 4-star kid coming out. And even though he didn't play much, he still came in as a 4-star transfer because of that talent, what he could do on the field. He gives this offense an extra dynamic. And that's why I love Kevin Concepcion this year. He doesn't have to do it by himself anymore. He's got Noah Rogers on the outside there and having that open up that offense. Concepcion could have an even better year this year. I think he'd have a breakout year with Noah Rogers kind of being that big play guy in this offense and getting him a call here. To me, they did an excellent job of filling needs, but Noah is the X factor as well. Like I think that he could take this offense to that next level.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, but I'm a big fan of Jordan Waters as well. Every time I was, watching Riley Leonard, or when he was healthy last year, trying to watch Riley Leonard, Waters always popped. There's a lot of burst there. I think that this running back room is in really good shape. When we just talked about, but potentially an incoming freshman having a role, but also bringing in these two guys that I think can kind of ease the load from Grayson McCall. But I don't necessarily think McCall needs that. I think that this offense
No.
is going to hum. I think with Rodgers, like you mentioned, I think between him and Concepcion, this could be a scary, scary offense to face for opposing defenses.
100%. And then, when we're thinking overall this offense and what we have in here, remember that while they did go after some transfers, they really clicked at the end of that year last year, and they really kind of have an identity now. Big thing we've been talking about on the show, and as we do these culture, they built it, right? And they have Grayson McCall there. Your point about Jordan Rodgers, man, like every time I watched him play or kind of put on the tape for Duke, I mean, he was their guy. Like he grinded it out. Okay, very good burst, explosion, those type of thing. Noah Rogers, Dakari Collins, former Clemson wide receiver. Again, very solid guys out there on this roster that you have to really like here. They could be one of the most underrated offenses in the ACC. Like I really think that NC State could be sitting there, and we're going to go through their schedule later. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to compete for an ACC championship if this offense clicks. And it can. Like, this is a much improved offense from last year. It's night and day, in my opinion, with what they have on the field now.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mentioned Dakari Collins earlier, but really last year he had a couple of games, got hurt, didn't play a whole lot, and then down the stretch he was good. And so when you talk about him as their wide receiver 3 now, I think that that's an important denotation there. But to me, this wide receiver core is probably up there with Clemson, maybe Miami as some of the best in the ACC. So I'm excited to watch them, which I don't necessarily think you can say about most NC State teams. Like most of the time, they're just a really tough defense, and the offense kind of chugs along. But to me, this offense is going to be explosive. I'm very excited to watch it.
Yeah, and that's how they were last year for the defense, right? When going through the numbers last year, this is what held them in games. We talked about their offensive statistics. Now their defensive statistics. Last year, they were 29th in points given up, so they really held them in check there. That's the reason why their offense was able to withstand early in the season. When you're looking at this, opponents' third down conversion, they were 5th in the nation last year. They got off the field, and they got off the field when they needed to. That separates teams. Getting off the field when you need to in the third down situations, and doing those type of things. You have to like their sack percentage, about in the 40 range there, but did a good job there. Pass defense was okay. Wasn't too bad, kind of a middling there. They were definitely a bend, not break kind of defense there, and just give their offense chances. If they can replicate that this year with this offense, they're going to compete for the ACC championship. That's kind of that's their ceiling, in my opinion, here. But they had a lot of turnover. They had a lot of losses out there that they're trying to fill.
Yeah, I think one thing that they're going to hang their hat on is David Van and Red Hibbler coming back on that front 7 as those edge rushers. 13 sacks between the two of them last year. I think that they're hoping that can continue because they brought in some transfers. They upgraded in certain areas. I like Brandon Cleveland in the middle. I hope that he can continue that production. But they brought in like Jahad Carter as your nickel, or I think he's going to play all over the place. Over from Ohio State. They just were like, hey, let's go to Ohio State and get some players, which is traditionally a good thing to do. But Jahad Carter to me is one of those guys that can kind of unlock the back end of the secondary. Obviously some new faces in here, and it might take some time to gel, but to me, when you have that explosive offense, hopefully that offense can kind of grind it out, and it's not just extremely explosive, so the defense can get a breather here and there. But this defense is good enough, I think, which I think is all you're asking for here.
Yeah, I mean, for first time in NCAA State's kind of like recent history, it's like, oh, the offense is good. Like they're obviously going to put up some points here. Like we just need our defense to be average, and we're going to compete. It's going to be there. Where before, I was always asking that defense to really kind of you gotta help us out here. You gotta get us off the field here. And like biggest losses, when we're going through it, Peyton Wilson's probably the biggest one. You're talking about him, 138 tackles last year, 17.5 for loss, 6 sacks, was kind of their leader, right? 6 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles. Dude did it all. Like he just kind of went out there and he was the do-it-all kind of guy there. CJ Clark, excuse me. He was also out there when you're thinking about him, a sack. He had, 22 tackles, nothing like amazing there. Torrin Wright, another guy out there that kind of, left this team. And we're thinking about him overall. Dejon Thompson, Nick Campbell, nothing like crazy though. Like I think that Peyton is the big one when you're thinking of like, hey, they got to replace that. And that leadership, I think, is the big thing. They're going to replace that leadership and everything there. To you, who are your big losses here for this team?
No, just Peyton Wilson.
Okay.
That kid was an elite athlete. He was a leader. Like you said, he did it all. One of the best linebackers in the draft last year. And losing a player like that, it's obviously it's going to be a fill it by committee type of replication of his stats, I think. And hopefully they can do that. But it's tough losing one of your most important players on defense, especially with how he played last year. But to me, these other guys are just like, sure, you're losing some snaps, you're losing some depth, but I think you've done enough where you're going to fill that, and that's going to be okay. Linebacker room is certainly a big question mark heading into this year.
100%. I mean, but you know what? They filled their needs on that recruiting trail really well. And this is why their class is really good on the defensive side. Like, you have to love kind of what they brought in. Guys that are there now, the early enrollees, kind of like, hey, they're there. Joshua Ofer is there. All those guys. The two guys that stand out, and when I was watching and going through some of their tape to kind of prepare for this, Elijah Groves, linebacker, 6'4", 206-ish. So he's got to put on some weight out there from Tennessee. He was number 7 rated linebacker in the class. Really great job of targeting him and getting them there. And then Ronnie Royal III. So he's an athlete as well, like kind of like Jonathan Paylor was, we talked about earlier. But he is going to be, he was phenomenal. He was named the MVP of their state title game. He rushed the ball. I think he had almost 200 yards rushing. At the same time, he also played DB. He had 5 interceptions last year. I mean, he was just kind of that do-it-all guy. It looks like he's going to play on the defensive side in that secondary because they definitely need that help there as they kind of address that in the transfer portal as well. But they did a great job of getting these guys in here. But Royal and Groves are their two main centerpieces.
Yeah, Royal's fun. I'm excited to see if maybe they make him a bit of a two-way, because when you flip the film on, you're like, oh yeah, he can play on offense too.
Yeah.
But I think that's a nice little boost to that secondary. Even if Groves, doesn't hit, 6'4", 206, he's a little light for the linebacker position. But honestly, once you get in this weight program, I think there's a chance that he's on the field this year. But they went for depth with the linebackers and volume with the linebackers. A lot of linebacker recruits here. I think that's smart after losing that group. That's how you build a program, and I think they're doing it the right way here. This is another good class. I like their offensive class a little bit better because I see some more potential impact players. But to me, this is a fantastic get here with this recruiting class too.
From doing this in good teams feel like, it's funny. Like I feel like they really filled, like, transfer portal wise, like they got guys they needed on the offensive side. But then on the defensive side, like, they really attacked it too. Like, good teams fill those needs and then are able to kind of recruit as well. They crushed it. They crushed their offseason in the recruiting tree on the transfer portal. And you look here, I mean, they really did fill out their team from the transfer perspective. Really went after safeties, obviously, kind of going through there. Donovan Kaufman from Auburn, Tamarcus Cooley as well, like looking at that safety position. We talked about Jahad Carter, Corey Coley Jr. Again, that secondary was a need. As you can tell, they really went after that. And that's a big thing they were mentioning. Villanova, Devon Marshall, kind of an underrated transfer. He, 247 Sports had him at 88 transfer coming over. They really like him. Cooley from Maryland, they like him as well. And then Chaz Wallace, I think, is an interesting one. I know the production hasn't been there, but they definitely need a DL that's almost 300 pounds, like 6'2", almost 300 pounds. He was at Colorado last year. We saw the train wreck that Colorado is. I mean, we're still seeing the train wreck that Colorado is. He was at Old Dominion before that, but maybe getting in that room, kind of seeing the Division I, getting ready for that in terms of like that high level. Then coming over here to the ACC, Chaz being that big boy in the middle can kind of give you that, like, that nose tackle depth that you need. Very good transfer class.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Chaz as well. I mean, you lose CJ Clark on the interior there, and then you replace him with a guy that I think can be as good or even better. And so when you combine that with all of the additions to the secondary, you can see a world in which this defense kind of fixes what the weakness was last year. And maybe they still have some of the same weaknesses. Maybe there's a new weakness because you don't have Peyton Wilson in the middle of that defense. But I think they've done a really, really good job. And okay, we like these linebackers that we have coming up. We like our recruiting class of linebackers. So we're going to hit the secondary really hard in the portal. And then we're going to kind of fill our needs in this way. I think it's a brilliant approach to the transfer portal and recruiting. Whereas I think a lot of teams are just kind of winging it right now. But NC State has some organization, and you can see the vision, which I think is exciting. I think there are going to be at least 3 players from this list that are impact players for them that don't make maybe our impact players list here in a second. But to me, good stuff on the transfer portal cycle.
Yeah, and when you look at the impact players, Aiden White, nose tackle, Brandon Cleveland, we haven't really mentioned him. We talked about a little bit. 6'4", 300, earned that starting job in the Pop-Tart Bowl. So shout out Pop-Tart Bowl. You got him out there. I mean, last year, 28 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, but more as a rotational guy. He only played in 5 games last year, but still was able to make an impact like that. I mean, he's a big boy, and then moved him over to the nose tackle. John Carter, Devin Van, those guys are definitely going to be impact guys. But my hat's kind of on Cleveland. Like, hey, can you kind of be that guy for them in the middle of this defense? Get him off the field, kind of preserve those stats that we saw last year, the rush stop percentage and all of that. So Cleveland to me is a guy to kind of watch as we go forward.
Yeah, and I'm looking for Devin Van to take a step forward. I think. Yeah. This is when you toss on the film, like there's a lot of really good stuff, but it's not all there yet. I think some of his tackling technique can be cleaned up, but I think when you have better players around you, there's a chance that those are kind of hidden a little bit better. So I'm excited to see what he can do. He's got to be a little bit better, right? Like I think maybe double-digit sacks would be a goal for him. I think he can get there. I think if he gets double-digit sacks, then this defense is going to perform a lot better than maybe I anticipate.
100%. And I got to give a shout out to the punter. Their punter's pretty good. Caden Noonkester out there. He led the ACC with 71 punts for 3,000 yards and 25 inside the 20-yard line, and 11 longer than 50 yards last season. So when we talk about flipping, flipping the field, they do that well because of their punter and everybody in there. So shout out Caden. I should have put you on impact players. I haven't put a punter out there, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an inside baseball there. All right, 2024 schedule. Let's kind of break it down. Over under wins for them this year is 8.5. So that's kind of, they finish at 9, when we talked about last year. Western Carolina, then they play the Duke Mayo Classic. So it's a neutral site game against Tennessee. That's a big game for this program. Louisiana Tech at Clemson now. Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse at California versus Stanford. Duke, Georgia Tech, and at North Carolina. Interesting schedule. I mean, going out to California and in week 8, game 8 for them, that's going to be a little bit of tough kind of stretch there. Duke, new coaching staff, possible kind of when you're looking at that. Obviously, the Georgia Tech game and the North Carolina game are 2 very tough games at the end here. What do you take away from their schedule here? Kind of tough, like tough, gritty games here where they got to really compete to win.
Yeah, I get nervous because there's always a clunker in there, right? Like you look at the Duke game last year, I think they were the better team, but they got blown out by Duke last year. When you look at what Duke could be this year with Malik Murphy, it's an interesting team at least. I think there are a few interesting teams here. I think Cal with Jaden Ott could be a difficult game, like you mentioned. I think Syracuse could be a difficult game just matchup-wise for them. I don't think Syracuse is a good football team, but I think Georgia Tech, going to Georgia Tech in week 11 and then at North Carolina, you start to see the path for like you're probably losing at Clemson, maybe not, but you probably, and then the neutral site against Tennessee just feels like probably a loss as well. So if I chalk that up to 2 losses, I want to take the over, but I think I'm going to take the under just to be safe because I just mentioned all those games where I think they could falter a little bit.
All right, we're going to disagree again. Shocker. I'm going to go over. I think you knew that just based on my opinion of their offense. I think that they can. All your points are validated, though. I think it's going to be very close, 8 or 9. Like, it's going to be in that range there, and that's really what it's going to come down to. If they win the game at Tennessee or against Tennessee, I think then you're talking about probably a 9-win team pretty sure-handed. Like, okay, I think they can get there. That's a big game for this program, especially defensively. What can they do against Nico out there, quarterback at Tennessee? What are they going to do against that offense, which should be a top 15 offense anywhere out there just based on that scheme that Heupel has out there. So when you think of those guys, like that's a big game for this program. I'm going to go over. You have under, but this could go really either way here. I just go back. If that defense can take that step and they really kind of fill those gaps and those holes there, I think that this is a really, really good program in ACC. And you're like, man, they're really competing there. Man, they are better than Georgia Tech. Man, at North Carolina, that's a rivalry game, but what does that team even look like at North Carolina? The big question I have is like, Who's going to even play quarterback there? Are we really rolling out Johnson again? Like, what are the things going on down there? It's kind of a mess. And so that's really where I'm at with this team. They're a very, very solid team. I think that if they all the buttons click and they're going, they can compete for an ACC championship and they'll hit that over pretty easily.
Yeah, and I don't blame you at all. I think I could convince myself that this is a 10-win team. And they just drop maybe Tennessee and maybe they go to Clemson and win. We've seen it before. This is a Clemson team that I think needs a bounce back. I'm curious to see if that happens for Clemson, but this is also, I think this offense is going to hit the ground running. I think they have to, playing Tennessee in week 2 or in their second game there. So I'm excited to watch this team. I think they will compete. I think they're going to be in all of those games, even if I do think they might hit the under. But this is an exciting state for NC State. Like the state of the program is in really good shape. So you can't say that about every program in college football, even every program that we're talking about in these top 25 countdowns. But NC State to me is on a nice path forward, nice path upward. And I'm excited to see what they do this year.
Yeah, and an underrated team in the new college football game coming out. You're going to have a little fun playing with this team if you want to. A little good environment out there. So, NC State fans, let us know in the comments, what do you think here? Over, under, how do you feel about maybe pushing for that ACC championship? And how do you feel about your offense? All these pieces coming in. Could this be one of the best teams that we've seen in the Doran era? Let us know. What do you think? So, appreciate you guys as always. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. We'll check you on the next video.